Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning. Now let's move to our first conversation this morning. Across Africa, agriculture remains a critical engine for growth and employment, especially for the continent's youth. Yet, access to capital continues to limit the potential of agribusinesses and small-scale entrepreneurs looking to scale. Joining us today to discuss unlocking capital for Agri-SMEs and youth entrepreneurs is Ada Osakwe, a globally recognized entrepreneur, investor, and advocate for African food innovation. She's the founder and CEO of Nuli Foods, now expanding to Washington, D.C., and principal at Agri-Tech Ventures, supporting some of Africa's fastest-growing startups. Ada also sits on several prominent boards, including the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, the African Enterprise Challenge Fund, and the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Good morning, Ada. It's good to have you join us this morning.
Good morning. It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right. So first of all, congratulations on Nuli's expansion to Washington, D.C. Now let's start with that. What does this move represent for you personally and for African foods brands globally?
Thank you so much. It's such a big feat for us at Nuli. We're a 9-year-old company born, bred here in Lagos, Nigeria. So it really is something special to be able to open up and expand globally in this way. It really is a proof point of, belief that I had since day one when we started Nuli, that Africa can truly feed the world, and we should truly begin to start thinking about building world-class global food brands that can travel across continents. So personally, it's really been nearly 10 years in the making of working with people, with my team, with farmers in Nigeria, working with, just playing around with our homegrown recipes and our own homegrown foods, and really seeing it being celebrated at a global stage. So for me, it's so special to see our indigenous crops incorporated in our Nuli menu and seeing the global community learning, but truly enjoying it as well.
Very well said. So we know that agriculture is often described as Africa's biggest employer, but yet funding remains one of its toughest challenges. Why does access to capital continue to be such a major hurdle for agri-SMEs and also youth entrepreneurs?
Yeah, no, this one is one that's really close to my heart. And for the last nearly 15 years or so, it's what I've worked on tirelessly. We have nearly a $160 billion financing gap for SMEs, especially in the agri-food space across Africa. And this sort of gets even worse when you move up the value chain upstream. So, there are a few reasons. The first I can think of is just there's a big perceived risk of agriculture, but which innovation today is dealing with, be it weather risks, price volatility, issues around post-harvest losses. And banks have to price that in, and banks are the typical financiers we find on the continent. So that's one. Second, many agri-SMEs, just like most entrepreneurs that are starting out, they don't have formalized businesses. They don't have their financial records, short operating histories. So they really struggle to meet the traditional lending sort of frameworks, or even for venture capital or private equity. They struggle to meet the metrics that are needed for an investor or capital provider to think that this is a business I want to back. When there's no data, where do you start? And then third, investors and lenders are often looking for scale and quick returns, unfortunately. And agriculture truly is one that requires patient capital. I'm a big believer in patient capital, especially for Africa, especially for Nigeria. So you have to truly think through the types of capital being matched with the type of business. And I don't think that link has happened in a solid way for agriculture. So for me, those are some of the big things that have been barriers for entrepreneurs, those seeking capital to truly move the needle in the agri-financing space. But we're fixing it, and we can talk about that during this conversation.
All right. Now let's look at unlocking capital now. From your work at Agri-Tech Ventures, what innovative financing models have you seen that actually works for small agribusinesses?
Yeah, it's across the board for small, for medium, for large. I have, worked at Agri to truly drive catalytic capital. I think the first is maybe one that I mentioned earlier, just thinking through structures that are more patient, but more tailor-made to the type of transaction you're looking at. Don't apply cookie cutter, maybe just a loan. Let me give you a blanket loan, pay back, no moratorium, not thinking through the cash flows of the business, and you're just doing something that is what you've done for an oil and gas business, for example. But in the food and agriculture space, it's different. Weather patterns, harvest seasons, price volatility. I'm thinking through lack of infrastructure here and there. So you should really try to think about if it's still generating cash flows. Maybe I give it a little bit of time. Maybe I price with the royalty-based type funding or revenue-based funding, and every time they pay me back or the money flows into their account, I take a little slice on top of it of my interest. So somewhere or the other, I'm getting paid back and improving my returns as a financier. I like blended finance models. We have to think about that for agriculture, and specifically in Africa, where you put commercial capital with concessional funding. This to me is the biggest area that we need to unlock. Get the concessional financing from folks like the public sector, government agencies, or development finance institutions, and match it with commercial capital to buy down that risk, to think about being more patient and more subsidized in the way it's applied to the business. And I think there's structures around that really make it exciting. I think at the end of the day, the important models that work really also think about financing with some sort of support, business support, mentorship support, mental support for a founder. I think we forget about that. We talk about technical assistance a lot, but sometimes it's not about just reading financials, but it's about how do you support a founder to grow as a leader and to build a business that is going to last. And that needs some level of more emotional and mental support to guide their leadership journey. So these are things that I believe at Agri we brought to the table over time, so that we can translate into stronger businesses and investable businesses.
Right. So do you think local financial institutions and also investors are doing enough to support agri-entrepreneurship, or is the sector still too dependent on development funding?
Oh my gosh, they have made a lot of progress. I still remember when I worked in the Ministry of Agriculture as a senior advisor to the Minister of Agriculture at the time, Dr. Adesina, and we did a lot of work with trying to unlock financing from the Nigerian banking system. Everything like giving guarantees and finding ways to truly buy down that risk. And they came a long way. They came into it. These banks have put funding towards agriculture. As you know, Central Bank did some work there as well. So there has been a marked effort. Many of them now have agri desks as well, so that it's more focused on the industry context. But a lot more can be done, I believe. It's still work in progress. And I wouldn't say that it's too dependent on development funding. Indeed, it does have to depend on some sort of concessional funding. As I mentioned, it should be a blend of both the commercial capital and the development funding. But you have lots of private capital going in, especially for the agri-tech businesses, folks thinking through innovative ways of doing things both on the farm, using artificial intelligence, using all sorts of data measures to predict what would happen with harvest, or to support farmers to know when to plant or when to put their inputs, all the way up to interesting platforms that allow you to aggregate, or allow farmers to aggregate and people to bulk buy, or at the food businesses, like in my business, restaurants, platforms that allow us to sell to our customers, the Glovos, the Chowdex. That's all innovation in the food system, and it's all being funded. So it's work in progress. It is work in progress, and I'm glad to see the progress being made.
So how do you think the government and policymakers can help de-risk investment in agriculture in order to attract more private capital?
One of the biggest things is to de-risk agriculture investments is to provide the infrastructure. And, I know it's maybe we sound like broken records when we say this, and it cuts really across many sectors, not just agriculture, but specifically in this space. Without proper infrastructure like roads, how do you take products out from the farms to the cities or to the factories? Without cold chain infrastructure, how do you preserve that produce? Without energy and power to process a processing facility, how do you truly run and transform that tomato into tomato paste? Or how do you transform the cassava into cassava flour? You need power. You need power. And how do SMEs run their businesses if they're spending all their operating expenses on running a generator? So this really needs to be focused on. And there are some models that happen where you have processing zones where it's dedicated power and infrastructure that allows businesses to thrive within that. But without doing this, the operational risk remains high. So I believe the government, policymakers can work towards this. When it comes to land, issues around land titles is important, especially for women. I think it's important that women start owning their title. Women farmers own the title as well. We can think about targeted fiscal incentives as well that encourage exports. For example, I take produce now to the US to use in our business. How do we think about the sorts of treaties with governments to make sure that we make our agricultural produce more competitive, as well as figuring out how to support issues around quality and making sure, as we think about exports, to be more competitive, we have to meet certain standards. And this truly, to meet those standards and certifications, it is expensive and not many businesses can afford it. So is it something that the government should think about using their proper agencies, NAFDAC, SON, all of that, to buy down this cost for SMEs? So there's a lot to be done. We know it's being talked about. And I think it's more about how do we consistently implement and execute.
All right, let's now move our focus to youth and innovation. You've been a very vocal advocate for young entrepreneurs in the food and agricultural space. So what are the biggest barriers you see for youth-led startups trying to access funding?
It's pretty much similar when I've been talking about SMEs and the folks we invest in at Agri-Day. They're typically youths. And it's the similar barriers I mentioned earlier, so I wouldn't want to repeat myself. I think maybe another thing I'll just add is something around that I haven't mentioned, is something around just creating the ecosystems for them to thrive. I talked about mental health and really providing that leadership capacity for an entrepreneur, a youth-led entrepreneur, to know what it means to build teams, what it means to be a founder, what it means to drive a business, to take responsibility, to be disciplined and have accountability. In this Gen Z world we're in, I do find that sometimes not having that discipline of a 9 to 5 and really going straight into the TikTok world or wherever, I think we're losing something there. And I think we need to pull back and guide young entrepreneurs, especially in agriculture, to focus on that. And then the second thing will be around social networks as well. I know what that has done for me as an entrepreneur, just being able to have the right people to call, to mentor you, to open up doors, to finance you, to advise you. And I think this should be something that we create those spaces for the networks and the natural connections to happen, so that it truly opens up the world of opportunity for youth-led startups.
All right, let's now take it to the global angle. With Nuli's international expansion, how do you see African food brands influencing global food system and perceptions of African innovation?
We're truly entering a moment where culture and cuisine are global currencies. I always say that, we're riding on the momentum of Afrobeats music and African fashion. Now it's time for African food. Because when you combine those three things, that's what it means to have culture. So it's not only about the creative industry and promoting Nollywood and film I think that we really need to also promote our food, and not just food from exports and sending raw materials, but it's about how do you create the experiences like Nuli, a restaurant, a fast casual restaurant that can stand next to some of the biggest brands over there in terms of the format it's being presented. And that gives people the experience. It introduces them to the culture. So I see us being able to do it in this way, and shift demand towards our own African superfoods. Our moringa is used in smoothies that we are over there. We use our moringa in our green juices, where we squeeze moringa with apple and ginger, and people love it. Our zobo sells out almost every day. Our fonio that we source from Jos, female farmers in Jos, fonio is acha. That sells out. We make it in a fonio jollof style. Our jollof is just the most popular one. So I feel like we can find ways to truly tell our African stories through our food, but we have to think differently. We have to think differently and present it in the way that the consumer is used to, but still staying authentic to who we are. And I think that's what we do at Nuli, and I'm very excited about the future.
All right, what lessons do you think African agri-SMEs can learn from operating in more mature markets like the US?
There are a lot. I think one I would say very quickly is the discipline to go by the rules, because there's full accountability and there's no way out. Be it making sure that your health inspection is passed, or you are making sure that you are treating your staff right, for example, and labor laws are enforced. I think that's really, really a big one. I think something around, and so that covers regulations. A second one is around the consumer insights and being able to iterate and truly build for the consumer. It's such a consumer-heavy space out in the US. And so you have to be on top of the ball and listen. The first week, the way our jollof bowls looked was very different from what it looks like today, because we wanted to present something that we didn't want people to think too much, because they're like, okay, how do you put it? How do you use it? So we just curated something in the way we would eat it in a Nigerian wedding party. And they love it that way. So really listening to your consumer in a big way. It's a mature market, so you have to also be ready. Very competitive. So you as a business going in there, you have to truly understand how you're going to set yourself apart. Don't just think that you are coming in and you do things the way you've done. We adjusted things on our menu while still staying true to the Nuli brand, but we had to listen very carefully and ensure that we had a strong differentiating position so that we stand out in a crowded market.
So much, Ada. Well, finally, before I let you go, let's look ahead. What kind of ecosystem do you hope to see for agri-entrepreneurs in the next 5 to 10 years? And what role do investors, government, and entrepreneurs themselves need to play to make that happen?
Oh, there are a few things. So it's a great question. I think, we need an ecosystem that's accessible. And by that, it means that all the frameworks, infrastructure, things, financing is all in place. We need an ecosystem, secondly, that has patient capital. I've said this a few times on this call, this conversation. Patient capital is so important. And finally, we just need to see value chains that are developed. Storage, logistics, farming, processing, all the way. And maybe I would even add, we need to see a pipeline of people excited to go into food systems and knowing that they will be rewarded at the end of the day, because it is a lucrative sector once done right. And I think that, ultimately the role the government has to play, and investors, they have to continue investing in public goods and in the models for governance. And entrepreneurs need to build business models that work and that scale and stand the test of time. So that's my view looking ahead.
All right. Thank you so much for your time on Business Morning Show, Ada Osakwe.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Still to come after the break, building sustainable agri-food value chains in Nigeria. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're still watching Business Morning, and you're on to the second conversation for today. Nigeria's agriculture sector continues to hold immense potential, not just as a source of food and jobs, but as a driver of industrial growth and foreign exchange. Yet, challenges around inefficiency, post-harvest losses, poor infrastructure, and limited access to markets continue to weaken the country's agri-food value chain. Building a sustainable value chain means strengthening every link from production and processing to distribution and consumption, ensuring that farmers, processors, and consumers all benefit fairly while protecting the environment and boosting productivity. And joining us to discuss building sustainable agri-food value chains in Nigeria is Elena Durodola, an agricultural expert and deep experience in agricultural science and production system. She's been involved in driving innovative approaches to improve productivity, sustainability, and value addition across Nigeria's agri-food ecosystem. Elena, it's very good to have you on the Business Morning this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. It's quite a pleasure. All right, let's go straight into it. Let's start with the broad view. When we talk about sustainable agri-food value chain, what exactly does it mean for Nigeria?
Okay. Sustainable. I think when we talk about the phrase sustainable agri-food system, we're thinking about sustainability and agri-food system. So for agri-food system, we're actually looking at the old journey from farm to fork, and that's the production on farm. We're looking at the processing, the marketing, and also down to consumption at home. And then when we talk about sustainability, we are also looking at the word sustenance, something being able to continue. It's your approach to doing something that ensures its continuity in future, not just one-time thing. There's a way you run a business that just means you're going to run it down. And there's a way you run agriculture that might imply that you might not be able to produce in future. It's like that. So that's really what, when we think about sustainability and agri-food systems, we're thinking about producing, marketing, and all of these things in a way that we're able to sustain them. We're able to continuously have these things. So that's basically what I would say is sustainability in our food systems. Yeah.
So talk to us about the major weaknesses and also bottlenecks in the Nigerian current agri-food value chain.
Well, I would say some of the major bottlenecks I would say is infrastructure. And another one I would also say is we also have challenges with data. And I would just say, starting with infrastructure, I would say one of the things that we always have challenges with, especially in agriculture, is waste, and it's a problem with logistics. So if we have better infrastructure for logistics, that could be something that makes agriculture a lot easier. And then when we also talk about data, because to a large extent, agriculture requires a lot of planning. And sometimes when people talk about policies or things they want to do, and then they are bringing data from 10 years ago, or they don't even have data at all, that kind of, means that whatever policy or plans or programs you'll be making from that data might not be suitable for the changes that have already happened, because the world is constantly changing, new knowledge, new things, and those things are things I would say are very important. Having data, having correct data. And I would say it's also like iterations. You have to keep going back. What's new, and then how does it influence what we the solutions we currently have? How can we improve our current solution? I would say another thing is education. To a large extent, a lot of people don't exactly know what is sustainable and not sustainable in the context of their own farm, in the context of their own agricultural businesses, even down to the supply chain, not just the farmers, people in the value addition part, even down to the food business industry itself.
All right. So from your background, you have a background in agricultural science and production system. So how do you think Nigeria can improve productivity at the farm level and still maintain sustainability and soil health?
Okay. How can we
maintain sustainability and soil health and also improve production system at the farm level?
Okay, at the farm level. So now we're talking strictly about the farm.
Yeah.
Improving sustainability at farm level, it's a bunch of different things. And you saying the mention of soil at this point, you're thinking more of agronomy and how farmers, can preserve the soil, how farmers can enhance the soil while doing their business. So we always think about food security, right? And when we think about food security, we're thinking about increasing production, we're thinking about intensification and how to just produce more. That's what farmers think about. And then there's also something to consider, that we shouldn't, deplete the natural resources when we are trying to do this. I'll just say some of the things that can improve sustainability and soil health when it comes to being on farm. An example would be technicalities. That's how I would say the farmer's understanding on how to plant their crop. Now, I would say on a maize field, it depends. The topography of the soil will determine how you plant it. Do you plant and I mean the slope? There's a way you plant that would make the soil more vulnerable to erosion. And with erosion year in and year out, you would realize that soil is no longer, or the land is no longer usable for agriculture again. That's a way that influences how that influences soil health. And then another thing you also see is people's use of organic manure or chemical fertilizers, and that's also something that also influences soil health. When we talk about using organic manures have their way of improving the soil health. They release nutrients to the soil gradually. They help microorganisms in the soil to also thrive, and that way we're also protecting biodiversity in the soil. And when you protect biodiversity in the soil, that means the soil is more resilient, even when it comes to climate change and all of that things. It's more resilient to even erosion. It's more resilient in the terms that it has natural enemies of pests and diseases of crops, and all of these things can improve soil health. Another thing that could also improve soil health and sustainability on farm is also, because now currently I'm talking about agronomy alone, but it's also how people use other things like pesticides, use other things like fungicides and all of those things when it comes to how do I put it? Because I'm trying not to use too technical words. Yes, so that it's very
relatable.
Yes, very relatable. So there's something we call integrated pest management, and it's using a bunch of different things from chemicals to biological enemies and even physical controls to pests. And when people approach protecting the soil or protecting their plants from pests, from just let's just spray some chemicals, a bunch of chemicals on it. Of course, it also has its residual effects on the kind of product you get from that soil, but it also means that you're also killing soil organisms around. And the implication is we don't always understand how important this biodiversity is for our soil, in the sense that all these other organisms that you would kill in the process of trying to kill some specific pest, all these other organisms that you'd be killing are things that are desirable for your farm, that are helpful, and that are very important for sustainability.
All right, let's talk about climate change now. We all understand how climate change can also affect farming patterns. So what adaptive measure do you think can, be used to scale and make agricultural production more resilient to climate change?
Okay. When it comes to, some of the points I've given previously are also kind of related to these things. Okay. Like I said, good soil health can make agriculture more resilient. Another thing we also have to think about is I also mentioned data previously. We also have to, have people that we need our weather people that are able to give, especially locally, not just nationally, because I don't think we have very strong weather forecasting here in Nigeria, especially locally, because we are thinking about local governments by local governments, because those are where the farmers are. It might be raining right here, it might be raining right here, and it's not raining somewhere else. And all of that means the weather condition for each place is very different, and there has to be fair warning for farmers. I'll just give a short story, because I'm more into livestock, but I can remember walking in on one of my staff crying, and she was crying about the fact that her father had planted some yams and rain had refused to fall. And, initially you wouldn't, if you weren't in that particular sector, you wouldn't realize that that's something that can happen to people. They could invest a lot of money into planting, and they probably have a rain-fed farm. And that's something that when they don't have proper data or information on what is going to happen, they wouldn't be able to plan. And then another thing people can also do in that situation is irrigation. Of course, we know that it might be expensive, but there are other ways. There are ways to collect waters in reservoirs when there's excess of rain that can be used to irrigate eventually. And that thing is also diversification, because it's better to plant more than one particular crop, just like a bunch of different things. That also improves resilience. And the thing is, even a combination of different crops on the soil is also good for soil health, because they kind of complement each other. And I would say other things that could be very good for farm is trying to incorporate agroforestry. I mean, although it always sounds like it's a lot difficult to mechanize farms that have agroforestry in place, but you realize that these things are still very vital for soil health, and we should find, even if it's trying to move into smaller machines. Of course, this is like going really far from where we are now, because we are even still trying to get machines at all, talk less of smaller machines that could walk in between and all of that. So some of these things, I'll say, so it all boils down to farmers being able to diversify, so that they have more than one particular crop per time. It also boils down to them getting proper information on weather, and then also trying to irrigate, also trying to conserve, or would I say collect water when there is excess of rainfall in reservoirs and all of those things. So those are some of the things that farmers can do.
All right. So one of the things that farmers usually complain about is post-harvest losses. So what do you think can be done to actually curb this, for us to be able to curb wastage and also strengthen processing and storage system?
Okay. Yeah, post-harvest loss is actually a very serious issue. I think it's estimated that about 1/3 of the food that we produce goes to waste. And yeah, I think one thing that farmers can do, especially very small scale farmers, is value addition.
Okay.
Yes. So if you actually do have a small farm, maybe a cassava farm, you should be thinking of how to process this cassava into all these things, maybe fufu, gari, starch, and different things. And then when it comes to bigger farms, because the truth is, when it comes to bigger farms, a farmer cannot be saddled with the responsibility of producing, processing, and storaging. We need a lot more people to come into the agricultural value chain. A lot of people want to come into agriculture, and the first thing that goes to their mind is, I want to have a farm, I want to plant. But there are so many ways to, join the agricultural sector beyond actually going into farming itself directly. You could join in just transportation in agriculture alone. You could join with just, marketing produce, buying off from farmers. And I know when the first question that you had asked about sustainability, I know I hadn't mentioned how important it is for us to look at. When we talk about sustainability, we have to think about the people, we have to think about planet, we also have to think about profit. So when it comes to people, which is the social aspect, people that come into agricultural value chain, they should see themselves as partners, not trying to exploit each other. Because when they're exploiting each other, the implication is it's not going to be sustainable. At some point, people would have to pull off because somebody else is suffering from the choices that partners are making along that value chain. But yeah, I think when we want to try to reduce post-harvest losses, those are some of the things that we have to think about. And then when people are in this agricultural value chain, beyond just being farmers, when they are marketing, when they are transporting, we also have more people that are advocating for infrastructure in agriculture now. And then we also have people that, because I feel people that are marketing and all of those things, they also have a say in in sustainable agricultural practices. Sometimes even beyond extension workers that may be able to tell farmers, this and this is what you can do better on farm. When you have off-takers, people that are committed to these farmers, you get to tell the farmers, oh, look, these are good practices, these aren't. And then those same people are also people that could also advocate, oh, these are roads that are bad. These are ways we could leverage the Nigerian rail for transportation in agriculture and all of these things. And we also have to think about the fact that I think I've not mentioned that today, but yeah, the fact that it is really very important that food waste doesn't happen, not just because, we need more food. It's also because food waste also has its impact on greenhouse gas emission. It also has and also that also affects climate change. And those are some of the things that we want to put in perspective as to why we want to really, try to tackle food loss and food waste in agriculture.
So how do you think we can better engage young people and also women in agriculture, especially in areas like Agri-Tech and processing?
Okay, how can we engage more people? Well, I feel like I'm very encouraged, I would say, by what I see with young people in agriculture. There is quite a number of young people in agriculture, and that's really very beautiful to see. One of the things I think we could do to encourage more people is easier access into the markets, or would I say support incentives to come. And I don't mean just incentives that are not really monitored, because sometimes there are programs that you start, you empower some people, and you realize that a couple of months down the line, those people don't follow through with working in that area. You have to empower people that have shown interest, that kind of have some form of legacy, or they're already doing something, or would I say pedigree in it, or they are showing a lot of interest. They've done this, they've worked with these farmers, like they have been doing all those things before. I think incentives for people, like governments could also incentivize people going into these things with subsidies for even vehicles for agricultural transportation, talking about subsidies for technologies, or just programs that encourage people to go into breeding, because there's so many things that we need. Like now, Nigeria needs to build our own genetic resources for agriculture, both for animals and for plants. These are areas that I think the government people would be interested in going into these things. And these are things that we need, especially when currently we have a lot of strong opinions about GMOs and whatnots and those things. I think it's very important that we ourselves, before we can say we don't want seeds from these people, we don't want animals from these people, we have to be producing our own seeds and animals if we don't want to be getting it from other people. And I think that those are areas that the government can incentivize or encourage people to come in, scholarship, things like that, working with research institutions. We have lots of agricultural research institutions, and then empowering people to come into agricultural technology, biotechnology, genetic research, and all of those things. We're doing our own things by ourselves. If we don't trust, people, foreigners, or would I say international organizations selling to us, those are things that we can, invest in. The government can actually invest in that. And the truth is, we always talk about capital for agriculture. A lot of people always need money to do some of these things. And I feel like it might sound sometimes to people like, why do we have to make agriculture sound like some form of charity case? But the truth is, what we don't realize is we never truly pay the true cost or price for producing food. Like the implication of all this production on our lands, it means that food is actually supposed to be a lot more expensive than it is. I know people are just going to be like, is food not expensive enough already? And this is why it's kind of very important that all of these subsidies should not exactly be seen as waste, because they are kind of very necessary to make food production possible. But it's just that we have to be very careful when we are subsidizing and all of these things. So we are not incentivizing wrong practices, maybe just giving people money for fertilizers that they dump in ways that are not good for soil health, those things. But we have to be very strategic about how we where exactly we put these subsidies, where we put these incentives, and how we manage this innovation so that we are not counterproductive.
All right, finally, what excites you the most about the future of agriculture or agri-food value chain in Nigeria?
There's so many exciting things, not going to lie. We're talking about precision agriculture. There's so many new developments. We're talking about just even a lot of agri-marketing companies that are coming up. And I'm really very excited to see all these things. I think eventually all these things will influence or promote infrastructure development in the coming years. But I would say personally, what excites me the most is the interest that we are now paying to livestock development in the country at the moment, because I'm sure we've seen that recently we now have like a Ministry of Livestock Development, and in Lagos State too, we also have a department for livestock. Like, people are now focusing more, and in the past times, a lot of times when you talk to people about agriculture, the first thing that comes to their mind is crop production, agronomy, and agriculture is a lot more than that. It's livestock, and I'm speaking particularly as someone who is an animal scientist, because that's more of my background in agriculture is animal science. I'm very excited for the future of livestock development in Nigeria. I'm thinking about a future where we can now produce a lot more milk than we currently do, because that's something that's going to be really good for us. We import rather most of the milk that we have, and I feel like, like I said, investing in our genetic resources, these are things that if we're able to do, breeding strategies and all of these things, and I know it's coming. It looks very promising, and I just pray that we're able to keep up with these things.
All right, thank you so much, Alina. It was really good to have you on the Business Morning Show. It was really insightful.
Thank you very much.
All right. And that's been our focus today on Business Morning, unlocking capital for agri-SMEs and youth entrepreneurship, and also building sustainable agri-food value chains in Nigeria. The Breakfast Show continues with a big story after this break. I am Deborah Ezeh. Do have yourself a good morning.